Hi, this is Laurie Shank, bariatric dietitian at St. Luke's Weight Management Center, and today we're going to give you a brief overview of carbohydrates, why they're important, and some basics to look for. So what exactly are carbohydrates? When you think about foods that you eat, there's typically three main building blocks that make up everything that you eat. There's carbohydrates, there's fats, and there's proteins. Carbohydrates are generally your body's main energy source, whereas fats insulate you and transport some vitamins throughout your body. And proteins are generally made to develop your lean body mass and your immune system, among other things. So carbohydrates are given their name because they are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules, which they're also known as a hydrated carbon, and you might see them abbreviated as CHO. So again, carbohydrates are your body's main energy source, and they're actually the only source of fuel that the brain and central nervous system can use. So some general science behind the carbohydrates. So the main units are called monosaccharides, which are made of one unit. There's glucose, which is the picture in the middle, which is the sugar found in your blood. Fructose, the one on the left, that is the sugar found in fruit. And then the one on the right is called galactose. That's one part of the disaccharide that is milk sugar. So these are generally, one unit carbohydrates. Then you have your 2-unit carbohydrates, your disaccharides, which are two monosaccharides linked together. So here you have the top one, sucrose, which is glucose and fructose linked together, and sucrose is your table sugar, which is made from sugar cane or, beet sugar, things like that. The middle one, lactose, that's the sugar found in milk, and maltose, the one on the bottom, that's not very common in foods. It is found in malt beverages and things like that. Then you have the polysaccharides, which are many, many different units all linked together. And this kind of composes your three main forms of complex carbohydrates. So you see the one on the picture on the left, those are your starches, which are found in things such as potatoes and grains. And then you have the one in the middle, that's glycogen. You can see that's very branched as well. That's the storage form of carbohydrates in our muscles and liver of animals. And then the one on the right, you see that's very tightly packed together in a very close network. That's the fiber, which is a storage form of carbohydrates in plants. And it's generally non-digestible by human beings because it's so tightly packed together. So what foods do have carbohydrates? Some of your more natural, healthier foods that have carbohydrates are your fruits and vegetables. There are some vegetables that are quite starchier than the others, such as potatoes, corn, peas, and winter squash, and also beans, nuts, and legumes. Also anything made from a grain, such as bread, cereal, and pasta. And then there's also your dairy products like milk or cheese or yogurt. So those are your naturally occurring carbohydrate foods. And then you have the other foods that have carbohydrates, which tend to be more of the simple added sugars, such as your candies and desserts, your sugar-sweetened drinks, fruit juice. Although it is a natural sugar, it is, a lot of simple sugar. And then also another thing that many people don't realize are condiments, such as barbecue sauce, ketchup, maple syrup, honey, things like that can add up in very small amounts. how much carbohydrates is recommended and how much carbohydrates do we normally take in. The recommended dietary allowance for carbohydrates is 130 grams per day for both adults and children, and that minimum is set by the average minimum amount of glucose that's utilized by your brain and central nervous system. Again, remember that carbohydrates are your body's main source of energy and the only source of fuel that your brain and nervous system can use. And how much carbohydrates does a typical American adult take in on average? For men, about 220 to 330 grams a day, and for women, generally about 180 to 230 grams per day. So a little bit above the recommended dietary allowance. And what do our bodies do when we eat carbohydrates? You have enzymes in your mouth, as well as enzymes in your GI tract that come from your pancreas and your intestines that break down those really highly branched complex carbohydrates. It cleaves them all apart and breaks them down into their one-unit monosaccharides. And those enzymes are called amylases. Once the carbs are absorbed from your intestines, they go straight to your liver, and the liver can do one of three things with them. Either transform the carbs into glucose, which is your blood sugar, to be used for energy. If you don't need energy at that moment, the liver can turn them into glycogen and store the extra carbs away in your liver and muscle. Or if it doesn't need any extra blood sugar and your glycogen stores are pretty full, say in the event that you eat a very large meal at one time, the liver can turn some excess carbohydrates into fats for storage. And the two main hormones in your body that are important for regulating the amount of blood sugar are insulin, which pulls the glucose from your blood into your cells to use for energy, and glucagon, which pulls the glucose out of storage back into your blood when it gets too low. So this is just a nice picture for you of what our bodies do with carbs. So it can be either carried into your blood and used for energy, turned into glycogen and stored, or altered into fatty acids. And again, the main function of glucose is to provide energy. Also, getting enough carbohydrates to provide glucose for energy spares proteins that you eat to be used for lean tissue building and immune system function. So generally 100 grams a day or more of carbohydrates will spare the protein to be used for lean tissue building and muscle building. And let's look at the three main general classifications of carbohydrates. There is your sugars, your starches, and your fibers. Sugar is the simple carbohydrates. It can be natural or added sugars. Starch, those are your complex carbohydrates, which are those very highly branched, linked together types of carbs that come from, plant foods and grains and things like that. And then fiber is your non-digestible carbohydrates that are generally found in fruits and vegetables and beans and legumes. So what do complex carbs mean, actually? A good analogy is to think of it kind of like Legos. Like all the blocks, Lego blocks, are pretty much the same, but you can have a handful of Lego blocks where if you want to put them back in the box, you just dump them in all at once, which would be representative of the simple carbohydrates. They kind of get digested very quickly and go straight from your stomach into your bloodstream very quickly. Whereas the complex carbohydrates are kind of like the Lego house. It's made up of the same individual units, but it's all already linked all together. And if you wanted to put that Lego house away back into its box, you'd have to pick it apart, each individual piece first, and then put them in the box. So it's a slower, steadier release of the sugar from your stomach into your bloodstream, which is why people with diabetes or hypoglycemics tend to want to lean towards the complex carbohydrates to help control the level of sugar in your blood. And then another important thing is to know the difference between a whole grain versus a refined grain. A lot of patients just look for the word wheat on the label, and that can be misleading because a wheat grain can be whole or it can be refined. So the important thing is to look for the word whole when you're looking on nutrition labels to make sure that the manufacturer used all the parts of the grain. This picture here kind of shows you why that's important. If you look on the left picture, the whole grain, you see the middle part, the endosperm, that's the part that contains most of the carbohydrates. And then there's that outer brown layer called the bran. That's where a lot of fiber and B vitamins and other trace minerals are. And then that little tiny yellow part in the middle called the germ, that contains a lot of antioxidants and vitamins and healthy fats. Now, when manufacturers refine grains, they peel off the bran and take the germ out, and they only use the endosperm. Now that, for the manufacturer, produces a more shelf-stable product, which means less food waste for them, and it also gives it a smoother texture, which is more appealing to consumers. However, then you're getting all of the simple carbohydrates, and you're not getting any of the fiber or protein or vitamins or minerals. So that's why the whole grain is preferable. And then let's talk about natural versus added sugars. Natural sugars occur in foods such as generally your fruits and your dairy products. And if you eat a food that contains naturally occurring sugar, you're generally getting a lot of other nutrients as well, such as fiber and vitamins and phytochemicals and antioxidants. Now, added sugars are sugars that are not naturally found in the foods but are added during manufacturing or processing or at the kitchen table to increase sweetness. So added sugars generally give you extra carbohydrates and calories with no other nutritional value. So those are the types that you want to avoid. And generally, 4 grams of sugar is about equivalent to 1 teaspoon, which would give you about 16 calories. And what to look for on the ingredients list to tell if there's added sugar in a product. These are just some different names of some added sugars that can be added to foods, such as high fructose corn syrup, even fruit juice concentrate or honey can be used as added sugars, maple syrup, molasses, nectars. Although they are natural, if they're added to a food just for sweetening, then it's still considered an added sugar. And then let's just talk about fiber very quickly. Why is fiber important? Fiber is very important for gastrointestinal health. There's generally 2 different types of fiber. There's soluble fiber, which helps lower cholesterol and lower cardiovascular disease risk. And there's insoluble fiber, which helps create intestinal bulk and helps create GI regularity and prevents constipation, diverticulitis, and colon cancers. Generally, if you eat a high-fiber food, it's very hard to distinguish how much is soluble versus insoluble. It's generally, most of the time, a mix of some ratio of the 2 of them in the same food. Most American adults don't get near the amount of fiber that's recommended. The goal is 25 to 35 grams per day. And anytime you eat a whole grain food, any kind of whole fruit or vegetable, and any bean or legume, you're getting a good source of fiber. And this website I have listed below is a good place to check out. You can check out the nutrient composition of foods based on the specific nutrient you're looking for. And then what exactly is the glycemic index? It's not 100% agreed upon how useful this is to control blood sugar, but the glycemic index is a scale that gives you an idea of how much a certain specific food will raise your blood sugar. The reference food is glucose or white bread, which has a score of 100, And low glycemic index foods have a score of 55 or less, and those include your non-starchy vegetables, sweet potatoes, most fruits, your beans and legumes, and your whole grain breads and cereals. Whereas high glycemic index foods with a score of 70 or more include your white breads and bagels, your simple refined carbohydrates such as cornflakes, puffed rice, instant oatmeal, white rice, pasta, pretzels, rice cakes, saltine crackers, and then also some fruits and vegetables such as potato, pumpkin, melon, and pineapple. Now, the high glycemic index foods will raise your blood sugar quite a bit more than the low glycemic index foods. And then what's the deal with low carbohydrate diets? As you're probably aware of the Atkins diet trend that was several years ago. Low carbohydrate diets are considered to be 60 to 130 grams of carbohydrates per day, and very low carbohydrates are less than 60 grams of carbs per day. And what low carbohydrates diets do, they tend to produce rapid weight loss because if you can remember, your body's preferred source of fuel is carbohydrates, and your body tends to store extra carbohydrates in your liver and your muscles as glycogen, and glycogen tends to store water along with it. So when you cut the carbohydrates out of your diet, your body will first use up its stored carbohydrates for energy, which depletes your body's glycogen and causes water loss as well. That tends to produce a rapid initial weight loss. After that, your body will go into a state called ketosis, where since you're not getting carbohydrates for energy, it will switch over to start burning your body's fats for energy. And that, when your body burns, it breaks apart your fat molecules and reassembles them into carbohydrates so that your central nervous system and brain have an energy source. And what that does, when it reassembles your fats into carbohydrates, it also has these little byproducts that tend to float around in your body called ketone bodies. So this is considered a state of ketosis. It does make your body a little acidotic, a little higher acid. You can lose some protein tissue and some potassium. You can lose some muscle mass. And you can have some side effects such as fatigue and brain fog and a fruity breath or a different body odor from the low-carb diet. And just what to look for on the nutrition labels when you're trying to decipher carbohydrates. Number one important thing to look at is the serving size. If you can see at the top of this example, the serving size says 1 cup. So 1 cup of this food would give you the nutrients listed. And it says there's 2 servings per container right under that. So if you ate the entire container of this example, you would have to multiply all of these nutrients by 2 to see how much you actually ate. And when you look at the nutrients in bold, you see there's total fat, there's total carbohydrates, and there's protein. Remember, those are your 3 main macronutrients that make up foods. So under fats, it tells you how much of that total is saturated and how much is trans fats, both of which you want to avoid as much as possible. So out of that total 12 grams of fat, 6 are saturated and trans, whereas the other 6 are healthy fats. And then you see the total carbohydrates is about 31 grams, and there's 0 fiber in this product and 5 grams of sugars. Now, one thing about nutrition labels is that when it tells you how much sugar is in a product, it does not differentiate whether it's naturally occurring sugar or added sugar, although this change to the nutrition labels might be coming soon. So out of this total 31 grams of carbohydrates, 5 are sugars, and then the other 26 grams must be starches or other naturally occurring carbohydrates. And remember, one carbohydrate serving is considered about 15 grams of carbohydrates. So if this nutrition label, if 1 cup of this food gives you 31 grams of carbs, that's about 2 carbohydrate servings, or 4 in the whole product if you ate both servings. And what exactly does 1 serving or 15 grams of carbohydrates look like? These are just some common foods. It's about an 8-ounce cup of milk, a medium-sized apple. Now remember, most apples that you get in grocery stores can be quite larger, so that might be 2 servings of carbohydrates in a very large apple. About 1 slice of bread, 1 6-ounce yogurt, 1/3 of a cup of pasta. Those are all about 15 grams of carbohydrates apiece. And if you want more information on carbohydrates, some good websites to visit are the Center for Disease Control, the Whole Grains Council, the USDA myplate.gov website, and the American Diabetes Association. And thank you for listening today, and stay tuned for more podcasts in the near future.